All right, welcome everyone to the Spark HL7 AU eRequesting Technical Design Group meeting for Tuesday, 25th of June, 2024. Mostly we just have one presenter today, and that's Heath. So Heath is going to be joining us shortly. However, before we do that, we just need to approve the minutes for the last meeting. If you could jump over to the next slide, please, Heath. That's the one we're looking for, 11th of the 6th, 2024. I sent this to the group earlier today. Just need someone to motion to approve those minutes.
I'll motion to approve those minutes.
And could someone second that, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. All right. We'll just take a quick vote. All those in favour of approving the minutes for the 20th, sorry, this is the 11th, please raise your hand. Okay, looks like we've got 17 for. You can lower your hand, thanks. And if anyone would like to vote against approving those minutes, please raise your hand. Everyone else will be counted as an abstention. 3, 2, 1, none against. 18 for, 24, 25, 24 abstentions. All right, so I think that's approved. Great, that's it from me. I'm going to throw over to Heath.
Hi everyone. Michael, did you want to do the current state of play?
Sure, I can do that if you like, unless Christy wanted to, but I can do this one. So congratulations, we got through wave 1 in the last meeting, which is quite the achievement. So now this meeting and the next one on 4th of July, we've targeted for the wave 2, which is the terminology, data types, and constraints on content. We got through 2 of those at the end of the last meeting, but we've got the rest of those in that list there to get through today. Hopefully as many of those we can get through today as possible and get decisions on. Anything left over will hang over to the next meeting. Then after that, we've got to get into system actors. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Not quite. You're right. System actors and obligations that go with those actors. And then the tidal wave at the end, which is everything else that we need to get done before our ballot for comment on the 5th of August. So it will be a tidal wave. Hopefully we can get through, depending on how far we get, some of these, we can get to the tidal wave quicker, but we'll see how we go. Just up to the next slide. So as we've been going, we've been making changes to the CI build of the eRequesting FireIG. So these changes have been made to reflect the last couple of meetings. There's a link there, someone might be able to put in the chat, but QR code as well. So you can see here, we've got the must supports on these elements that have come up in the previous meetings, as well as the cardinality defined, as well as, like we've got there on category, we've identified that we're going to be using those 2 SNOMED codes for imaging and laboratory procedure. So what we're doing is after each meeting is we're actually making those changes so we can see this progress. So definitely go have a browse and have a look at this so we can see what we're doing. And as we go, we'll keep updating this each week.
Thanks, Michael. So today I'm standing in as a Spark facilitator for Andy, and who had another clash and with our usual presenter, Angus, is on leave, so I'm not sure who gave him permission to do that, but maybe someone in Sonic. But anyway, I will just sort of from my background perspective, I've actually worked with Andy at Magentis and to help develop the implementation guide for their implementation with Sonic. So this is something that I've been quite heavily involved in. So there's a little bit of history from our perspective as well. So hence why I've stepped in today on their behalf. Okay, so wave 2, basically what we're going to step through is looking at what is the fire element that we're discussing, what is it actually, what's its description and intended use. Then what are the additional constraints that we need to put on this particular element? So at the moment we've identified that the element is must support and its cardinality. But now we're going into that second wave of area around, are the data types relevant? Constrain them down to a smaller set if that's what we want to do. Whether there is particular data type profiles that we want to apply, and we'll better understand that in a moment. If it's coded, what is the appropriate value set that we should be using for this particular element? If they are references, what's the appropriate resource types that we are referencing for this data element in the context of eRequesting? And are there any particular profiles of those resource types that we need to apply, and any other constraints? So that's basically the pro forma for each of the data elements that we're looking at in this particular wave. So where we left off last meeting was with subject. And currently this is what we've got in the
Subject.
in the IG from wave 1, where we've got must support and mandatory 1-to-1, and we're inheriting the existing set of reference types of patient, group, location, and device. And it's basically what we are proposing is that we constrain this list down to just a patient, and we are taking that one step further and saying we want to use the AU core patient profile for this particular subject element. Is there any comments on this? And I guess the rationale for this is that at the moment within the context of release 1, we are focusing on patients only. So we're not looking at groups, we're not looking at devices. That is the principles of release 1 eRequesting at this point in time, the use cases that we've discussed thus far. Dan.
So far we've discussed providing a reference to a patient. And I just wanted to ask the question, how do we foresee we get the patient demographics when that patient doesn't reside in our system, and when that ID, object ID or resource ID is different in our system to what's on the service request?
It's a really good question, Dan. And I don't think we're up to that particular technical implementation decision at this point in time. So my recollection is that I raised a bit of a hornet's nest on this particular element, and hence why it got stuck, because last week there was a further constraint on this, which is the reference element of the reference type was being proposed to be fixed to 1-to-1. And I suggested that we needed to keep that open at that point, at this time, because we don't know how we're going to actually reference patient resources that are potentially shared, or whether it's in the same bundle as this service request. whether it's in a document, whether it's in a message, etc. So at this point in time, we're just focusing on service request and its usage. Is in a big picture like that, like you're suggesting, is probably too much for us to consider today. Danielle?
It's on a separate topic, so just to, if we want to keep resolving that conversation, although I mean, I guess comment wise, I agree with you. I think we don't know yet, so the best we can do is be unconstrained and then go through and test it and see where we want to constrain it down, which I think will either be, okay, but there are ways to do that, and different people have solved it differently.
So there may be basically another iteration around this, whether it's release 2 or whatever, where we actually know a bit more. There's potentially even more downstream IGs, and perhaps the government are putting out a tender or something along those lines. We don't know what that future looks like. So hence the constraint that was there last week on the reference sub-element has been removed. So that we do have the potential of using the identifier if that is the solution that needs to be supported. So are you okay with that for now, Dan?
Yeah, I guess if we don't have any alternative, I was just thinking in terms of what we have today, in terms of HL7 2.4, at least we get the full set of patient demographics in the message. So how are we comparing to that? It was my large question.
So obviously we need that information somehow.
And that can happen, like this supports that. It just doesn't require that you send a patient resource with the request, which I think was which was where that previous one that has been watered down was saying, was that, there should be a resolvable reference to a patient that contains the demographics. And in this case, it's saying that might be the way you go, but that will be up to you. And at this stage, we're being silent on any requesting to allow for multiple different ways to do that.
Sounds good.
Danielle, do you want to raise your topic?
Yeah, my topic was going to be that if we keep that as patient, I think the expectation has to be that by default, this is AU core patient, and the AU core resources coming in from the AU eRequesting, where the patient is what is defined in AUCDI, and those things are referenced where we talk about patients, practitioners, and so forth. I think the position that we need to adopt from a starting point is the AU core profile that's gone through those basic demographics and then go from there. So I think this needs to actually be set to AU core patient, not just patient.
Which is the proposal. So,
yeah.
Michael, you had your hand up no longer?
No, I think we closed out the last conversation, so I didn't have anything more to add. I'm happy.
So I as facilitator, I would like to motion that we accept this proposal of constraining the subject element for eRequesting to a reference of a single type of the profile AU core patient.
I'll second that. Michael Wilson.
Great. I'm going to attempt to launch a poll to see if we can vote on this one. Is everyone seeing a poll? Yes, brilliant. Stephen, you've raised your hand.
Yes, sorry, I was a bit slow trying to find the raise hand button. So for the cardinality of constraining to 1.1, I just have a question about parentage relationship DNA testing. The forms usually have two persons, person 1 and person 2. So if we constrain it to cardinality of 1.1, does that mean that we are ruling out those kind of test requests?
So the underlying specification has a upper constraint of 1, so we can't make it more than 1. So the use of group would be the way that you would manage more than one subject. And yes, at the moment we are saying it group is out of scope. So any use cases that require that is currently out of scope for R1.
I don't think that that's desirable because I think parentage, DNA testing or family relationship type of DNA testing is not uncommon. And for so R1 to constrain it to 1.1 is not desirable.
So the question is not whether it's 1.1 because it can't be anything other than a maximum of 1. Are you concerned about the lower being?
I'm concerning about the upper.
So I think the concern is whether it's a
it can't be
group
more than 1.
or...
The only option is really to include a group, so to support your use case. Now, that's not, again, as usual, nothing is stopping you from using group, just that you can't claim eRequesting conformance if we apply this constraint on this profile.
Yeah, and group is actually sort of like not that desirable either. But
and I think you might have to go to the O&O group to have a discussion about that.
Can 2 service requests in a requisition be used for that?
Before we go here, there's another element that can support this. There's an element for subject. There's also an element called focus for when the test is not about the subject here. So you can, like with an observation for like mother and child, there are 2 elements that can support a complicated relationship. So we can do that. If we want to support that edge case and do must support. I think it's an edge case though that we should be looking at after we get like the basics in place and test it out and then see what else is needed for this particular case.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that as an edge case, and using focus is not necessarily sort of like the desirable way to do it either. But anyway, I'm happy to. I mean, I will rest the case just to register that those kind of needs are not uncommon. And if you look at the form from Sonic, it has actually sort of a testing person 1, testing person 2 in there, and to me, that's something that needs to be considered.
Okay, so I think the limitation we have here is we can't alter the cardinality, so we will have to find an alternative for that. Perhaps we can note in the minutes that that has come up as an issue, and we will seek to find an alternative way to resolve that issue in the future. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, thank you. That'll be good. Thanks.
Okay, great. David, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just also wanted to register that Australian Pathology has a number of members for whom this will be a significant issue. So exactly the issue that Stephen has outlined, where we're talking about essentially partner testing, because it is one request that's got essentially 2 patients. And
okay.
To address the suggestion that you made, Chris, about whether or not it could be 2 requests, the answer is no, it's got to be 2 patients on 1 request.
Yep. Okay. So we'll find a way to resolve that since we can't alter the cardinality. We will look at how we can best do that. It may not be an R1 thing we can solve, but we will note that and look at it.
So just quickly for everyone's sake, I'm back on the base service request profile, and we can see that subject is actually fixed to 1-to-1 there. And as I suggested, there might, again, the focus. Where's the focus element?
That's in R5. No, that's in R5.
Yeah, sorry, it got introduced in R5. I think we can use it to pre-adopt that in R4.
Okay.
It's come across from observation. And we might also look at an extension to support this particular use case. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right.
How did you go with your votes, Chris?
So that one is 36 for, 11 abstained, no negative.
Great, thank you. So that one is passed. Okay, moving on to requester. So this is the authorizing individual, organization or program as defined by the base specification. It is currently must support with a cardinality of 1:1. Reference type of practitioner, practitioner role, organization, patient, and related person. The proposal is to restrict that set of references down to just the practitioner role type with a profile of AU core practitioner role. The main rationale for that is that it is the practitioner role that will carry our Medicare provider number, as well, not only as the practitioner associated with that role, but also a location and organization as required. So if you need to state what location you're in making this order or what organization you represent, then all of that is able to be carried within the practitioner role. And at this point in time, we're really saying that this is the way to represent a requester. Any discussion? Stephen?
So I remember that years ago when I was still practicing, there are tests that require authorizations by a more senior practitioners with special or with specific credentials. So by constraining this to 1.1 again, we are throwing those use cases sort of out into a non-compliance land. So are we certain that there will not be use cases that we need to support in which test request needs authorization?
So again, we're limited by the base profile, which is an upper limit of 1. The definition, again, is saying who is the authorizing clinician. Although on this particular one, it doesn't quite say that. It's initiated the request and has responsibility for its activation. So I think in those situations,
It was in the comment, Heath.
was that in the comment, was it? This, not the dispatcher, but who is the authorizer? Yeah, so really it's the authorizing provider should go there if there is that level of double signature, if you like. Daniel? Sorry, Daniel?
Yeah, look, just a comment here. I'm not a clinician, but I'm just feeding back some information. So in far north Queensland, in rural and remote areas of Australia with a lot of fly in, fly out, Medicare registration is a huge problem, and it takes time, and often the doctor is only there for a limited period of time. I can't speak to it with absolute authority, but I'm aware that there are major problems around the requirement to be Medicare registered before you can do something as a GP in this context. So I guess what I'm arguing for is, whereas I would probably recommend using practitioner role wherever possible, that there still be an option to fall back to practitioner if that was the only option.
And we certainly considered that. We felt at this time that we would like to get best practice in as R1, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Yeah,
once
but
again,
practice
there
has
is
to
nothing
work.
stopping you from implementing it otherwise, but you can't state conformance to the profile if you do it that way. Danielle?
All I would just say is I agree with best practice, and I agree with that, but constraining it where you have known problems is problematic.
On a similar note to that, practitioner role doesn't mandate identifier. So you can still supply practitioner role without supplying the identifier.
Yep, the only thing it requires is a practitioner.
What about organisation?
Not required.
That's optional as well. Yeah.
Yep.
And there's certainly benefit, I guess, even just to have the organisation there as well. At least then you know who the practitioner is representing.
Yes, so requirement to only supply practitioner is fulfilled by practitioner role.
You
Maybe
okay
just
with
not,
that, Daniel?
maybe just not optimally.
Yeah. Okay, if there's no further discussion, then once again I'd like to move that the requester element is constrained to a reference of a UCore practitioner role only.
I'll second that.
Right, I'm going to attempt to relaunch the poll. If it comes up with the votes already in it, then we'll do something else. Okay, looks good. So I'm noting we have 2 votes against currently. Would anyone who has voted against, like to discuss why they've chosen that? Help us understand what the issues might be. Don't have to, just putting it out there. Okay, I'm going to end the poll there. All right, so that's 29 for, 2 negative, and 12 abstained. So that motion is passed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to service request code. So this is the service that's being requested. It's a codable concept. It's currently, we've decided that it is must support and a mandatory 1-to-1. And we're putting forward basically a proposal, one for a pathology use case, where the pathology test code can be either a free text or coded. And when it's coded, it will use a value from the value set, the RCPA, SPIA, requesting pathology terminology, but it's extensible. So if the concept that or the test that you want to order is not as part of that value set, you can specify an alternate appropriate code. And as I said, it could also be free text. Similarly, for imaging, it can be free text or coded. And although we don't have a definitive value set at this point in time, there is one being drafted from Ranska. And again, it will be extensible. So any test that is not part of that initial value set can be coded using a different code or recorded as free text. Any discussion? David?
This one's going to be interesting just to keep things in sync, because I think RANSCAR and RCPA are looking at how they accelerate the intake and approval of new products really quickly, new codes very quickly, and making sure that we don't have a whole bunch of codes that have been created in this ecosystem are kind of eventually orphaned is going to be interesting. So whether the extensibility happens on the fly within ordering systems, or whether it's a more formal process, is going to be an interesting topic. I don't think I've got an answer here, but I just wanted to raise that both of those projects, SPEAR and RRS, are both trying to solve this extensibility issue and the pace at which this change can happen.
Yeah, and I guess my comment to that is that basically all we're doing here today is saying it will be from this value set, and the actual codes associated with that value set will be managed elsewhere. So we're kind of kicking the responsibility down the road to someone else. I don't know if there's someone that, Michael, are you wanting to respond to this, or do we have the other Michael Osborne maybe? Go ahead.
I was just going to reiterate, I guess, David Haycock's perspectives in terms of the RCPA, SPEAR and RANSCA RRS work. So that's underway at the moment. And I think in terms of the approach, we're going to be going through a validation process in person at the CDG workshop on the 11th and 12th. The workshop for the terminology validation will be on the 12th, where we're wanting to, I guess, confirm the approach of this from a somewhat of a technical perspective, as well as what is the requirement in terms of the expectations from a requester and a receiver of the request in terms of the relevant terminology. So I think that's going to be worked through. In terms of, I guess, the voting on this, I'm keen to hear from others in terms of whether we're in a position to be able to do this now, or whether we want to sort of postpone or move to following that discussion.
Daniel?
Separate issue, is that okay? Or do you want to continue to?
I just see that Stuart's there, so maybe can I just see if Stuart
Absolutely.
wanted to respond to the previous topic?
Yeah, thanks, Heath. So from the RANSCA perspective, we will be bringing a draft set of terms for use at the August Connectathon, so that we can all have a play around with them and see what that looks like in terms of actual practice. Like Michael Hosking said as well, there is a validated process for publishing new terms through to the value sets that are both clinically reviewed and technically reviewed as well, so that they are all validated and properly able to be used codes within that value set. And we're developing the process to get them all on board as quickly as possible. Cyro have been great for the actual speed of publishing. So it looks like we should be able to get things online pretty quickly when it comes to new code sets and new procedures, new modalities, just about anything that is covered within SNOMED itself.
Danielle, did you?
No, I think maybe if Jai is talking from a government perspective first, I guess I wanted to just raise a thing on essentially what we are trying to put out on the 5th of August, because that's really our target we're agreeing to here. But maybe Jai and Daniel could go first, and then I'll add to that.
Jai.
So I was probably just going to say, agreeing with Heath, that I think that the question that we're asking here is fine in terms of our awareness of the terminology that we need to point to. The work that's underway with RRS and SPEAR and the 5 value sets will continue. And like Michael said, there's, I guess, some engagements coming up where we'll get into the deeper detail around that. But I think the question of the day is, are we pointing to a terminology set, and are we allowing it to be extensible where the terms aren't available and there might be local terms available? So I think that's fine in terms of going forward with this decision today.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Daniel.
I think Daniel's next. Yeah.
Yeah, look, my question really is, I'm not quite sure if it fits in this way, but is there an intent here that we would put in something that indicates that the coding should be used where such is available rather than free text, that would align with some of the international handling and things even dating back from the early meaningful use stuff in the US? Was if there's a code available, you must use it rather than doing free text.
Which is what the extensible binding does, basically. If you can represent the concept using a value in that code system, you have to use the code. It does do that one. And that's important that we kind of highlight that for people. It's not just you can just use a free text version of a code that's in that value set. If it's in there, you are expected to be using that code.
Do you have another topic, Danielle?
I do, because what I'm interested in, especially at this point, is like we were talking about the fact that we might need to use local codes and some other things. I'm pretty happy to support putting in the binding for the SPIA requesting path terminology and extensible now, and having that there, because that means when we're putting it in, we can then go and test that. And when we put it out for ballot for comment, we can get that wider audience and capture the formal feedback on like a baseline thing, and then go and manage that through. And that's really good. My worry, I guess, on that side then is imaging, because whatever we need to be agreeing now is what are we going to be putting in as what is something for imaging. Will there be, Stuart, Michael Osborne, will there be something available by 5th of August that is the RANSCAR equivalent?
Sorry, I think Michael Osborne dropped off the call a little bit earlier.
I'm
yes,
Stu, but you go ahead because you've got the current information, right?
Yeah, sure. So we've got a set of terms that we're working on with Michael and Matt at the moment that are pretty much all ready to go. So we just need to get that published out to a value set, and we'll be able to bring that to the August event. No problem, I don't think.
I mean, no, because the August event is after, is well after this time frame to a degree. Like, I guess we're like, what do we actually put out in ballot for comment, which is beginning of August?
Michael,
$1 million question is, what's the URL for that value set?
Exactly.
And I think that's with Ranska to approve, because we've gone with a approach we wanted to use ranska.com as that URL. And I think it's sort of tied up in governance right now, isn't it, Stuart?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
So my suggestion might be that we just say it's, we just don't have a binding at this point in time. So it's just codable concept, no binding until a binding is provided.
Does that also go for the pathology one? Or are you just talking about the imaging?
I'm talking about the imaging. So I agree with you. I think that we go ahead with the pathology being the RSCPA one, whilst the imaging one is just a no binding codable concept.
Well, it's David here from the RCPA. Can I come back to this group on that, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
You're reluctant?
Your value set exists. It's published and available.
It is, but actually we're doing some work with Michael and the guys there at the CSRO at the moment about a terminology subset to release as release 1.
But the URL exists.
I understand that. Yeah. I do understand that. But I just want to seek some clarifications within the college and have a conversation with Michael as well.
Okay, so it sounds like we should defer this item until next meeting. Is that sufficient time, David?
Oh, that's heaps, Heath. I should be back to this group within the next couple of days. I just don't want you to release something and then we have to wind it back. That's all, because that wouldn't be the best.
Okay, then
thank you.
Are you happy with that, Danielle, that we defer this until next meeting?
I mean, I am. I mean, unless there are any objections from people, I think clearly we need to get that information, and this needs to be our next TDG thing that we make a call on.
Do we need to vote to defer?
We can see if anyone has any objections, and if not, that's passed by general consensus.
Yep. Okay, so if you do have any objections to deferring a vote on service request code, please raise your hand now. I think that's fine. I think we can defer that to next meeting.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate that.
Cheers.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to status. So service request status. This is the status of a service order using American terminology. And that definition is actually more associated with this value set that is listed with these particular values. So the current values in this value set is draft, active, on hold, revoked, completed, entered in error, unknown. And the current proposal, or the proposal that we're putting forward today, is that we restrict that list to only active, on hold, revoked, completed, and entered in error. So the ones that are being removed from the list is unknown and draft. The rationale for draft is that it is effectively an initial workflow state that is really internal to the placing system and shouldn't actually be exchanged. So draft orders is not in scope effectively of R1, is what we're saying. And the unknown we don't see as helpful, I guess. So that's why we've suggested that we remove those two. I'll come back to you in a sec, Roma. And you may also feel that looking at changing the value set description to be more along the lines of this is the status from our places perspective, hence the term, or the sentence here, the places status of a service request. So again, we've put it in sort of more Australian terms, using the term request instead of order. Roma.
I get, I guess, why draft, but unknown seems like a useful thing to keep, less for data that's generated sort of exactly at that moment, but for things that are kind of coming in historically, or again from paper records or things like that, kind of things where you, like, I know something happened here, I know it's not a draft, but I don't exactly know what it is. It feels like, yeah, sometimes your information isn't perfect because computer,
So from I guess I've seen some chatter recently about, rather than assuming something that is an assumed value, such as completed, you would rather be more the fact that it is an unknown status. Is that what you're
basically
alluding to? Yeah.
And it's easier to do analytics with things like, if you have completed, that there's also going to be results and things associated, or like it's definitely gone in. If it's unknown, you're okay with the fact that other kinds of linked data may not exist. There's no guarantee. There's no reason to believe they should be there.
Ruben, did you put your hand up with regard to this?
I did, but I think Ken was ahead of me.
I'm assuming Ken was a different topic, but Ken?
I just wanted some advice on clinic. I think that what I'm going to talk about is a future thing, which is clinical decision support. And in one of the approaches might be to send a draft eRequest to a clinical decision support system and get advice on the suitability of that request. So, but that's futuristic, but I'm just seeking some clarity on where do proposed requests get handled in the system. And we had this issue about the authorization as well. So if there's a request that needs authorization before it comes formal request, how are they all handled internally, or handled by completely separate systems? So I'm just unsure about how relevant that is.
Yeah, I mean, all of those scenarios I kind of personally see as internal to your system. I understand there's a clinical decision support scenario. But again, as you say, it's perhaps a little bit futuristic. And is that really something that we want to entertain in R1 at this point in time? So,
or just maybe a comment to say that, this is removing draft does imply that clinical decision support isn't being considered in the first instance, or draft doesn't imply the authorization issue or anything else.
Yeah. Ruben?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of related to what Ken was asking about. And then there's also a broader comment. I first wanted to know if there are any actual and production systems that are doing requests that support draft to unknown. If anyone on the call can actually speak to whether those statuses are supported at the moment.
Well, I've mentioned before that e-order systems can have multiple requests, and the requester might consider that they've drafted and they're going to repeat the e-order with an update. But there's no distinction between whether the first one was a draft or the first one was an error. As far as the lab's concerned, the draft would have been an e-order they could have actioned. It's just that it's been superseded by a new e-order.
Is that something that you would exchange with another system though?
What do you mean?
Would you share that draft that you were talking about with a independent system?
Well, it depends on how we set up a common registry. I mean, again, you'd have to be able to distinguish between updates to that registry, but whether that on hold, does on hold mean that you're not sure that you're finished, and you force the clinician to be sure that they've finalised the report before they've said it's active?
On hold is after active, so it was activated and then it becomes on hold, but not cancelled, kind of thing. So don't go ahead yet with the order.
Look, I think it works for R1. It's just I just don't see. I don't understand where the future of these interim requests or requests requiring information or authorization where they, because if we say they all belong to your own system, it's like, well, that might be a major part of the requesting process.
Yeah, I think my broader point here, Heath, was really for us to exclude things like this, we need to have a very high degree of certainty on the business rules in which this IG is going to be implemented in. So do we have that level of certainty at a concept of operations level that we definitely don't want to support draft or unknown service requests for R1?
No, is the answer to that question.
In that case, I'd suggest deferring till we actually have certainty like that.
Well, I think we drew it back, and I can't remember the conversation that we had, Chris. There was certainly some of the other co-chairs or facilitators that are not on the call, because I asked the same question. I said, we're not constraining these statuses in other profiles. Should we be doing that? And they seemed adamant that they wanted to remove these two.
Yes, I wasn't in that discussion. I think the problem with that issue is that, as Ruben pointed out, we don't have a clear idea of the workflow, and these states imply workflow, so we should have a very good reason for removing them.
Yeah.
And personally, I would vote against this motion if I could vote, which I can't.
Okay. So, Sean.
Yeah. Hi. This is my first time I've come to this meeting. I'm a representative of Australian pathology. I am a pathologist. Now, there's just a couple of things that I wanted to comment on, and I know it's maybe not related so much to this what we're talking about at the moment, but Ken did mention the issue of clinical decision support. So obviously, as a medical practitioner, we do not want a prescriptive clinical decision support in the future where a doctor is not allowed to order certain, whether that be radiology or pathology tests. So we feel quite strongly about any clinical decision support not being prescriptive. The doctors can still order what they think is clinically appropriate. The other question I've got for you guys, and I apologise because I haven't been to these meetings before, the e-request that you're talking about here, is that going to be a generic e-request for pathology and radiology?
So are you asking, is there a single profile for pathology and
So when the
radiology
patient gets the e-request, is it going to be a generic e-request, or is the doctor going to be allowed to put on the e-request which provider they would prefer the patient to go to? Now, understanding that the patient has every right to go to whatever provider they want, but is the e-request going to be able to, is the referrer going to be able to indicate, because there are very good reasons why a GP or any other specialist may want their patient to go to a particular radiology or pathology provider. There are very good clinical reasons. So I just wanted to know whether these e-requests are going to be generic or not, or whether there is that option.
Sorry, I'm going to interject there. Sorry, Sean. No, they're good questions, and the answer is we're working on that.
Yeah.
But it is quite off topic for this particular discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Yep.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, we are supporting directed requests. So we're trying to support directed requests,
because that would be very strongly favoured by Australian pathology. I just want to
thank,
and I apologise for asking that question, because it is obviously very important.
No, that's absolutely fine. And people come into the meetings and they don't know what's going on. And it's our job to bring them up to speed, right? If you would like to have a discussion in more detail about that, I'm happy to take that offline and give you some more information.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to have interrupted. And
no, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I also just want to point out on your first point that right now, the state that we pick here doesn't really affect clinical decision support at all, since what we're talking about is the exchange of a message essentially from one place to another, and any CDSS around what you're going to order can be done within the system prior to that occurring.
Yeah, and actually the next element actually covers more around proposals of clinical decision support. So it'll probably become a bit clearer when I get to the next slide. But I think what I'm hearing at the moment is that we shouldn't be constraining this at this point in time. My thinking is that there's no point in deferring this as such. I think that really what I'm hearing is that there is no need to constrain this binding, and that's really all this proposal is doing, is effectively constraining the binding. I know there is that second part around the description change, but if we're not changing the value set that's being used, then I don't see much point in just making a constraint purely from a definition or description of the value set perspective. So I don't know if there's any comments on that, but my thoughts are that we basically reject this proposal, move on, and not come back unless someone wants to raise it through ballot comments in the future.
So I guess that's actually a motion to not constrain this element at this time.
That's how you want me to state it?
Yep.
Well, yeah, I guess if we're making that decision, and that seems to be that, we should be recording it, that's where the group has gotten to. So we've got that there. Okay. I mean, I'm happy to second that.
Okay.
So the motion is to not constrain the value set for status.
Okay, so just to confirm, we're not voting for the proposal on the screen. We're voting for no change to the base. So if you agree that we are not changing the base, we are keeping draft and unknown, please vote affirmative. Okie doke, I'm ending the poll. 3, 2, 1. And that motion is passed. 35 for, 7 abstained.
Cool. Can I do a time check? We got 34 minutes, is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, so next element is intent. And so intent is somewhat tricky to describe. I guess the definition again on the value set is the kind of service request. And if you look at those lists, the list of values up the top, for starters, based on the previous discussion, the first one is proposal. So for clinical decision support, we would be using a clinical decision support system would be actually creating a instance of service request using the intent of proposal. And then it would have a state associated with that proposal. But what we are proposing here is that we only use the order code from this list. So we're not supporting plans or proposals. And there is also these concepts of original orders, reflex orders, filler orders, instance orders, etc. So again, in R1, our use cases are simply a placer to filler order, and we're looking to try and keep this as simple as possible and not get into the tricky bits of things like reflex orders and clinical decision support, etc. And hence the proposal is to have a fixed value of order. And keeping in mind, again, if you're using an intent, you've got an instance with an intent of proposal and an intent of order. They are actually separate instances. They are not like status, which transition. They are actually separate things. So you, just hopefully I haven't confused you more, but I wanted to put that out there, and I'm more than happy if people want to disagree with that current statement. But I'll go to Tawinda for his comment.
This intent service request or intent is at group level service request or both?
Service request. That's what we're talking about today, is service requests on an individual test request.
Yeah. So what we are thinking is, look, if we are looking at the order level, specifying this intent as order make a distinguish between, like, we can differentiate between whether this is a service request for an order, looking the intent, and then it goes to service request at test level, which can be instance order or original order, to make a differentiation on it.
Yeah, so we're not stopping you from using those others, but in the context of a eRequesting profile, we're looking at keeping it in R1 simply one and only kind of service request. That is the most generic order. So I'm not fully understanding the implications of your comment, Tawinda.
Yeah, even if we want to be conformance with eRequesting, and when I look into a service request in my system, and one it is at order level and one it is at in test level, can we go with two different values over it to be conform with eRequesting?
I don't know how group's going to be managed at this stage. So the scope of this proposal is on an individual request level. So on a per test request, we will be stating that it is the intent of order.
Why not instance order?
Sorry?
Why can't this be an instance order?
What use case is that supporting?
I can share my screen and put just briefly, if you stop sharing and put the definitions on the screen, or you can, sorry, I've popped them actually
I'm trying to find
chat.
it actually while I'm
No, I've
being
popped
very...
it in the chat. So if you link,
thanks.
click off that. And you'll note there that instance order is a child of filler order. So that represents the details of the filler's intention to act on a submitted order. It's quite specific.
Yeah.
You make that a little, zoom in a little bit, Heath. So this is of the various values, the parent one, I guess, is order, and then all the rest are children. And in terms of going down to instance order, that is specifically underneath filler order.
And what we're talking about here is an order from a placer. So I think that's really what Danielle's saying is within our scope of R1, where we're exchanging placer orders to fillers, what you do within your filler system is your business, not the business of this profile. Might move on to David.
Just a quick question. I want to look at it from two perspectives. Firstly, is a clinician's perspective. If I'm ordering, if I'm creating orders and then all of a sudden new orders are being created, like reflex orders or filler orders, is it helpful to be able to tell the difference if I'm looking at my orders in a repository through my clinical information system? And the second,
Undeniably, yes, is my opinion. But that's not what we're dealing with today. Go on.
Okay. And is this going to cause us any sort of billing problems down the track when we try to use this data? You know, if we are creating a reflex order, who is the ordering party in this case? Is that going to be connected in a way that doesn't mix them up? That was all. Yeah.
My understanding is that's really from a lab to lab. And maybe someone from a lab could elaborate.
That's right. The doctor may request something and the pathologist deemable test can add a test, but they just tell Medicare that they've added that test rather than change the initial order. I have to admit I'm much more comfortable with this set growing with R2 and so on, with CDS and authorizations and any future billing systems than the previous.
Yeah.
Because the previous, as was said, is to do with the process of the clinician, whereas this is the process of completing an order, and we're going to have to redo all that. I mean, we're going to have to change laboratory systems and so on, so they communicate with the ordering systems to say when they've changed that order to a reflex and so on. We haven't got those systems at the moment, and so I do see that all of the others are going to be R2s and 3s once we develop the need and the legislation regulations for those systems.
Thanks, Ken. Ruben?
Thanks, Heath. Look, there's no debate from me that we need to exclude proposal, plan, directive, and option. What I'm not sure of is whether we want to exclude all the sub concepts of order at this stage until we're a little bit more sure of ourselves in terms of the workflow and actual business requirements for what the specification will be adopted for. So that's, I guess, my general comment for discussion here. I'm happy to exclude those others that are very clearly out of scope. But
so
for
do
the
you
others,
see the process of coming back in a later iteration and adding them being problematic? Because I think that's what our intent is to constrain this down to a very small set and grow as we better understand and our use cases expand.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. The problem is I don't have the use cases for R1 in front of me. So I don't know if we can say that we're definitely not going to support all of these subtypes of order.
I don't think any of the use cases that we have looked at have included any of the orders other than original order, which is covered by order.
And deliberately, I'd say we've deliberately stayed away from reflex orders. We've deliberately stayed away from filler orders.
So I suppose it's a question of timing and how we want to go about things as we develop the standard. We could make assumptions and potentially revisit them, or we could wait until we have clarity. My mindset is one that prefers clarity, but we can do it in any order the work group likes.
Okay. Roma?
I actually think this one's more okay for trimming, because the other types of orders, frankly, are orders still. And even if it's true that you're losing detail, like I in no way challenge that, but you can at least express, I am ordering an X. Even if you've lost some resolution in that, it still lets you have some basic communication. We can add them in later. And the other side of that for me is, if I had to implement these, and I had to implement these with all of the annoying and frustrating, like, different types of orders, it's going to probably be much more difficult for me to adopt the standard at the beginning. If I can start with as a pathway, look, I don't fully understand when things are reflex and filler and blah, but at least I can get an order in. I can at least do something, and my system won't crash when something sends me something, a little bit off. So I think it's it's going to lower the bar to entry, which I think we want for R1 in particular, without stopping us later getting in the full workflow that does have, reflexes and fillers and everything else, plans, proposals. So I quite like restricting it.
Thanks, Roma. Danielle?
Yeah, I'm going to put my hand down. That was exactly my comment about
Awesome.
the degree of complexity to have to support all of those and an expected system behaviors.
And as I said, they're effectively different instances as well. So, then we've got all this relationships between this one is related to that one, and et cetera, et cetera. So, so I would like to put forward then the proposal of only having order as a fixed value on eRequesting service
I'm happy
requests.
to second that. Thank you, Heath. So that was Danielle seconding.
Okay, so we are voting to only allow order on service request intent. All right, so we'll be closing the voting in 3, 2, 1. Done. All right, and that one is passed 34 for, 1 against, 10 abstaining.
Thank you. So next one is requisition. Now, I think we basically have talked about this one on, I think it was the 11th, with the minutes that we've just approved, where we made it must support and a cardinality of 1-to-1. The identifier is to represent the group of of individual requests. So it effectively is our placer group number. The proposal here is to constrain the type of identifier to a profile of AU local order identifier that is defined by AU base. That profile, I'll bring it up in a sec. That profile has a value set associated with it that includes 4 values: a filler group number, a filler identifier, which is effectively an identifier for an individual test, a placer group number, which is the places grouping of orders, and a places identifier, which is a identifier for each individual test. So what we're looking to do for requisition, because of the definition of the element itself being the composite or the group request identifier, we're looking to constrain the type to only the placer group number within the profile of local order identifier. Any questions or comments? Danielle?
I have a quick question on this. So if requisition is one-to-one and we have identifier, and this one requires placer group number, so we're always going to have like a group number, and we might also have the individual, and that'll be on the test. That's just confirming that's how that plays out.
Correct. So the next one is about the identifier, which will also use the local order identifier, and then we will use the placer individual.
Thanks for clarifying.
So yes, and happy to go through the next proposal so that we can actually do them collectively, if that helps people better understand how this is going to work together, rather than doing them in isolation. But I'm not seeing any other questions or comments, so maybe I'll put forward the motion to accept this proposal to constrain the requisition element to the AU local order identifier profile with a identifier type of placer group number PGN.
I'll second that, Michael Wilson.
Okay, voting is up on your screen. Okay, closing the voting in 3, 2, 1. And that one is passed 28 for, 15 abstained, none against.
Okay, so moving on to identifier. This is a collection of identifiers. It must support, it's basically any identifier that you want to associate with this particular order, as it's currently defined in its unconstrained form, other than its must support constraint. It can be any identifier, like as in no profile associated with it, or it can be a AU local order identifier, which again is constraining the types of identifiers to those 4 that I talked about previously. The proposal here is to continue to allow any identifier so that you can use whatever identifier types and local identifiers you want. But also on the specific profile, and there is some question around how we actually implement this, and I'm not sure if that wants to be part of our proposal today or not. But at the moment, it's the AU local order identifier, but constrain it down to just the placer identifier type. So myself personally, how we actually implement it within the profile, I think logically what we're trying to achieve here is to say that here is where you put your placer identifier for this individual test, and you're also allowed to provide any other identifier you want as well. Danielle.
On a point of where we would say that this is where you do that, that's profile specific implementation guidance. Like I don't favor defining definitional profiles where we don't use them, where we say you can do anything you want, and you can also do this other kind of thing that you can do anything you want, and creating a structure that we're not then like implementing. Unless we're actually going to put some rules or a warning or a constraint around it, there's no need to do that. But I absolutely say, if we want to say this is where you put that, that should absolutely be where we put the guidance that says this is where you do that.
Andy?
I guess in some ways it is, I would reflect Danielle's comment. I actually think it's useful to expose in the IG that there is a placer identifier, because I don't know whether it would be immediately obvious that there is a way of doing this. So I kind of like having it there, but equally it seems that having a filler identifier description there as well would be useful. But I mean, I don't, I understand Danielle's issue about, well, what's the point of saying anything if we don't have anything specific to say, but I actually would find it useful, I think, to both describe the placer and filler, because they would be common identifiers that people are likely to go, well, I'd like to do this, but I'm not sure how, and they would have to go on their own journey of discovery to kind of find it. So having somehow being able to document it as an option, even though there is no obligation associated with it, I still think would be useful.
So the question I've got is, and I guess it is related to that question on the page, do we need a new placer identifier profile?
And not if you're not going to do anything with it. Like if it's going to do nothing
it to
but be
just
a
placer.
comma, but you're not though. Like if you are actually going to constrain it to be placer, then yes. Or if we put must support on places, then like if we're going to do something with it, then by all means. But if we do nothing with it other than define it, that's my concern, is that it's just.
And where I was going to go next was actually a new profile that limits it to filler and placer, because we've already got the placer group number and requisition, so it doesn't make sense that we repeat it here. Then the question is, do we want the filler group number to be put here? We can't put it in the requisition because that's the placer one. So interested in, basically what this should look like from the room. And maybe I'll just go to David first, and then we can see if the others have got some suggestions on how to proceed with this proposal.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask a clarifying question, and at the risk of sounding really dumb, I thought I understood what this was, but now I feel like I don't understand what this is. So on a paper request form, what is this representing? Is this representing kind of a request reference number that might be put there by the person who's placed the request? Or is it sort of a barcode that might be stuck on it by the lab when they receive the request at their SRA? Or is it neither of those things and something else?
So it's neither, if I understand your question, because the requisition is actually what you were talking about on the paper form. So it's more in the electronic space where you want to individually identify a specific test that was included on the paper form, where there might have been more than one. So if anything, it's probably more for hospital systems that do this by default, where they're actually saying, okay, here's one order, here's its identifier, here's another order, here's its identifier, etc. So the requisition is really what comes from that paper form, and could be that barcode, etc. But we haven't really got down to, is it a barcode? Where does this token, the futures token concept? So we do need to leave this open, hence the any identifier, because we don't know what identifiers we might have to support in the future. And I wasn't involved in the conversation around identifier when it was had a few weeks ago. So, but there seemed to be a large demand for this test level identifier back then, hence why it's here as must support. Andy, maybe you can perhaps provide that insight or make your other comment.
Well, I can channel Angus. I mean, obviously, if you have an existing version 2 implementation, then you naturally need some way to mimic your version 2 placer identifier, and this gives you a place, so to speak, to house that identifier. The question was, is there a specific business need for this identifier? Because obviously, in terms of fire, we're always got a way of identifying something, but in particular, by calling it out as an identifier, it's a business identifier that in some aspect has people involved in its use. So what is the case for that at this point in time in what we're aiming at in R1? So that was kind of a discussion around it. You say that I think the thing I'm looking at, both the placer and the filler individual test identifier, is that if there was a need, if someone did have a need for one, then I think showing an example of how to do it is a useful contribution that the IG can make. By staying silent and simply saying you can have 0 to many identifiers, go for your life, doesn't give any, I think, guidance for how you might do a placer or filler identifier for an individual test. So I do think there's value in including it, even though we're not making any statements. So for instance, we are not going to, I think, restrict you from putting PGN in here as well, if you wanted to. Not that I think there's any use to do it, but I guess that's what you're getting at, Heath, is what kind of, is there any constraint with those identifiers that we want to place? And I don't think there is. I think, we're not sure at the moment about what use may be made of this. And I think as we get some implementation experience, we will see examples of use that may be made, and then we could be more prescriptive around obligations. But I think at this stage, it's more around the opportunity, and if you were needing something, we could give some example that you could follow.
So I think that's along the lines of what Danielle was saying as well. And so basically, from reading the room, I wonder whether the proposal is to do nothing again. So we leave it as is, that it is left as either an identifier or AU local order identifier, allowing the 4 types that we've defined in the AU base. Dan?
My understanding is this was for the placer identifier, for that its unique identifier for the order. But on a separate note, I wanted to highlight that we deferred the decision to change the cardinality of this attribute until this discussion as well. So I wanted to raise that and make sure everyone was happy that the proposed change of 1 to many was still deferred.
Yeah, that's correct. I think it changed from 1 to many, so it's back to 0 to many today.
So that's, yeah, sorry, I guess we as a group deferred the decision of what to do there. Are we ignoring that deference and just saying, right, we're going to stick with 0 to many now, are we?
So I'm just looking at the minutes. The only notes there, because again I wasn't there, so I'll lean on those that were. indicates that it was deferred to wave 2, but I'm not sure what was deferred. So was there a decision to make it must support, and was that agreed? And it was just the cardinality that was deferred?
No, there was nothing. There was nothing agreed for that particular element.
I think we deferred the whole discussion because we needed to see the constraints around identifier to make any call on what the implications should be, rather than just trying to look at little pieces of it. And no, I think we do need to be, as you pointed out, quite clear about the different uses of identifier versus requisition and what their purposes were, and how they then were implicated in their use. The question was whether there was a compelling and always required need to identify the individual tests from a business identifier perspective. And there was more different opinions on the requirement. I think there was more consistent opinion around the order as a whole and the absolute need to identify the order as a whole, but we struggled to get consensus around the business identifier associated with the individual test, where those had a need for it and where there was a use for it. We weren't restricting you from doing it. It's just we weren't necessarily making it a requirement. And we talked about you need to support it if one is provided, so you need to carry it, not error, but there was no obligation to include a individual test identifier.
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes to go. Does anyone want to motion that we pass this proposal, or would anyone like to motion that we defer this discussion?
I'd motion that we pass as described.
So when we say as described, as in no constraint on the identifier type, or with the constraint of identifier type?
No constraint.
Okay, so we have a motion to pass with no constraint. Does anyone wish to second that?
So just to be clear, it's must support 0 to many with a type of identifier or a local order identifier.
I would like to request that the cardinality be changed to minimum of 1 because of that. That again, going back to transport of the message.
All right, I think I'm going to defer this one. Sorry, everyone. I don't feel like we have consensus on this. And we're at time.
No, we just taken action to update the proposal so that it includes must support, because the proposal was worded like it was any normal wave 2. So I didn't understand that we hadn't already agreed on some things.
Yep, okay. So the action is to update this proposal with must support.
So was that a motion to
no,
must support, or you're pulling the pin?
We're pulling the pin.
Yeah, it wasn't covered in the last one, so anything that's in needs to be covered in the next proposal when we revisit it. The cardinality, the must support, and the actual constraint.
So we're actually ground zero on this one still.
Yes.
Unfortunately, yes. All right, thank you everybody. Apologies for pulling the pin on that one at the end, but I didn't think we were going to get there. The next meeting is on the 4th of July, and we'll see you all there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.